Mr. Hoa. 72 years old, thin and frail, with snow-white hair. Living a wandering life without purpose. Every day, he silently pushes a cart filled with scrap metal along the bustling streets of the city. No one knows anything about him, except for the image of a dirty old man, always bowing his head to life. Those who meet him on the street usually just offer a pitying glance, or sometimes contempt. One cold winter evening, Mr. Hoa was collecting empty beer cans from the trash cans, then heard shouts from the end of a small alley. He glanced and saw a group of young men were chasing a young man. The young man stumbled and fell painfully. Without thinking twice, Mr. Hoa threw his cart to the side, quickly stepped forward to block the group of young men. "What are you doing? Don't push people too far." His voice was hoarse but still full of authority. The group of young men laughed loudly. "Old man, mind your own business. It's none of your business." Mr. Hoa remained unwavering. His gaze was so piercing, made the group of young men instinctively step back. Perhaps not wanting to tangle with an old man, they muttered a few words and left. The young man collapsed, breathing heavily, looking at Mr. Hoa with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. If it weren't for you, I would be done for," the young man said, his voice trembling. "It's all right, son. Get up," Mr. Hoa replied, helping the young man to his feet. Before leaving, he saw something fall from the pocket of one of the thugs. A small key with a strange pattern on its head, which piqued Mr. Hoa's curiosity. At first, he intended to throw it away, but then a hunch told him that this object was no ordinary thing. Mr. Hoa put the key in his pocket, returned to where he usually spent the night, a dark corner behind an abandoned building. He couldn't sleep all night. The key reminded him of the past, about the days when he was a different person, with a happy family, a respectable career and a bright future. But everything crumbled after the tragic death of his daughter, who lost her life in a case where the real culprit was never caught. The next morning, Mr. Hoa decided to investigate the key. He followed the symbols on the key. He went all over the city, asking second-hand dealers. Finally, an old locksmith recognized the pattern on the key. "This key is for a special type of filing cabinet, usually only found in large offices," the locksmith said. Those words were like a piece of a puzzle, falling into place in Mr. Hoa's mind. He began to recall clues he had overlooked in his daughter's case. Could this key lead him to the truth? Mr. Hoa decided to act. He pretended to be a cleaner to infiltrate a large office building, where, according to his guess, the key would be useful. He carried a calm, disheveled appearance, holding a mop, sneaking through the floors. Every time he was asked, he just smiled gently. "I'm just cleaning, not bothering anyone." When he reached the 5th floor, the place that seemed to be the archive area, he saw a large cabinet in the corner of the room. His heart beat faster. He walked slowly towards the cabinet, careful not to make a sound. When he inserted the key into the lock, a click sounded. The door opened. Inside were dozens of thick files. Mr. Hoa's eyes lit up when he saw a document stamped secret. He quickly took it out, hiding it in his old cloth bag, and then left the building before anyone noticed. Returning to his hideout, Mr. Hoa opened the document and began to read. Each line in the document, like a knife stabbing into his heart. "This is a file on a wrongful conviction case from 25 years ago. in which a man named Tam was accused of murder. But the evidence suggests he may be innocent. What was even more terrifying was the names that appeared in the file. Well-known police officials and businessmen. All were involved in covering up the truth. Turning a page, Mr. Hoa froze when he saw a picture of his daughter. An old photo. But the girl's face was still radiant as ever. The caption under the photo read, "Potential victim in crime cover-up." Potential. Mr. Hoa frowned, his hands trembling. The daughter he thought he'd lost to an accident, turned out, could be connected to those behind this case. Mr. Hoa's eyes suddenly became unusually sharp. It seems the old man, powerless as everyone sees him, is just a mask. After 25 years of burying the past, Mr. Hoa knew what he had to do. Find the truth and bring justice to his daughter, no matter the cost. After reading the entire file, Mr. Hoa seemed to gain additional strength over the years. Wandering and living in suffering did not cloud his sharp mind. In his head, every clue began to be rearranged into a plan. Clearly he knew he couldn't do this alone, but also couldn't trust any AI. Mr. Hong thought of Tan, the young man he once saved from a gang of thugs. Through a few inquiries, he found Tan at the law school dormitory. When he appeared, Tan was extremely surprised. "Old man, you're looking for me, what's the matter?" Tan asked, his eyes full of gratitude. "I need your help," Mr. Hoa said in a low but firm voice. He recounted everything, from the key to the file, to the death of his daughter. Although Tan was surprised, sensed the seriousness and pain in every word he spoke. As a law student, Tan clearly understood that this wasn't just a personal case, but also a story about the corruption of the legal system. "I will help you. But we must be careful, because these people can be very dangerous." Tan agreed. The file revealed that one of the key witnesses of the case was Mrs. Mai, a former employee at the police agency, who had retired many years ago. However, Mrs. Mai had disappeared from the city since the case. Following the old addresses, Mr. Hoa and Tan found Mrs. Mai living in seclusion, in a remote rural area. At first, Mrs. Mai seemed hesitant and refused to reveal anything. "I don't want to be involved in this anymore. I lost everything for telling the truth," she said, her eyes filled with fear. Mr. Hoa didn't give up. He sat with Mrs. Mai all afternoon, telling of the pain of losing his child and his desire for justice. Tan also persuaded, saying that this was the last chance for her to do the right thing. Finally, Mrs. Mai relented, revealed that the initial evidence of the case had been destroyed by a group of powerful people, and the mastermind was a wealthy businessman named Vin Fat, who is the head of a large corporation. Knowing the name Vin Fat, Mr. Hoa and Tan continued the investigation. Through information from Tan's friends, they discovered Vin Fat had a secret asset, a document warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where evidence could be stored related to his illegal activities. The two planned to break into the warehouse. Tan disguised himself as a delivery man to infiltrate the area, while Mr. Hoa observed from outside. However, things weren't so simple. The security force here was numerous, and the warehouse was equipped with a modern camera system. When Tan was almost discovered, Mr. Hoa cleverly created a temporary power outage by cutting off the external power supply. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Tan quickly found an important document file and escaped. This document revealed that Vin Fat was not only behind Mr. Hoa's daughter's case, but was also involved in many other wrongful cases. The pages recorded enormous bribes that he used to manipulate the police and the courts. A photo in the document showed Vin Fat once attended a party 25 years ago, where a special person appeared. Mr. Kwong, a former police chief who is now retired. Mr. Kwong was once known as someone directly involved in the wrongful case of Mr. Hoa's daughter. Mr. Hoa and Tan sought out Mr. Kwong, although he initially denied it. But when he saw Mr. Hoa bringing the documents and recordings that Mrs. Mai had once kept secret, the secret recording kept by Mr. Kwong couldn't be denied. That's right. I hid everything because I was coerced by Vin Fat. He holds too much over me, Mr. Kwong admitted, his voice full of regret. Mr. Kwong also provided a crucial piece of information. At the time of the incident, there was a recording of an emergency call from a witness that had been deleted from the records. This recording could prove the victim's innocence in the case from years ago. However, this recording was believed to have been destroyed. Through further investigation, Mr. Hoa and Tan discovered that a copy of it was still stored in an old police archive. To get this recording, they had to break into the facility. But this time, the plan was exposed, and both were discovered by Vin Fat's henchmen. During the tense chase, Tan was injured, while Mr. Hoa was forced to face danger to save Tan. However, both eventually escaped, carrying the precious recording. With all the evidence in hand, Mr. Hoa and Tan decided to file a lawsuit against Vin Fat and his accomplices. Although Tan was just a law student, he took on the responsibility of preparing the documents and persuading a law firm to join the lawsuit. Meanwhile, Mr. Hoa sought out other victims of Vin Fat to persuade them to join the fight. Mr. Hoa and Tan's journey for justice was now no longer just a personal story. It had become a movement where the vulnerable stood together to fight against injustice. But before them still lay a difficult battle, as their opponent wasn't just one man, but an entire rotten system. The documents that Mr. Hoa and Tan collected painted a clear picture of the power network that Vin Fat controlled. Not just a wealthy businessman, Vin Fat also headed a system of manipulating the law. From the police and lawyers to even the judges, he not only hid his crimes, but also used his power to silence those who dared to oppose him. When the lawsuit was about to be brought to light, Vin Fat immediately reacted. He hired a team of 5 of the best lawyers to defend himself, and used all his connections to pressure those supporting Mr. Hoa. One evening as Tan left the law office, he was secretly followed by a group of people. On the way back, they stopped Tan's car and threatened him. "You think you can beat Vin Fat? Get out of this case. Otherwise, neither you nor that old man will survive." Tan returned in a state of panic and recounted everything to Mr. Hoa. Instead of fear, Mr. Hoa appeared unusually calm. "This is their way. They use fear to make us back down. But if we're afraid, it's all over." Despite saying that, Mr. Hoa wasn't careless. He asked Tan to temporarily stay away from the investigation, so he could face Vin Fat himself. As he continued to review the documents, Mr. Hoa discovered an unexpected name: Lawyer Tran Dat, who had been a close friend of his in his youth. Tran Dat is currently one of the top lawyers in the city, but also the one working for Vin Fat. He had helped Vin Fat cover up many illegal dealings for over 25 years. Mr. Hoa looked for a way to meet Tran Dat at a charity gala he attended. In his old suit, Mr. Hoa appeared amongst the wealthy, attracting contemptuous glances from all sides. When facing Tran Dat, he spoke frankly. "Dat, we were once friends. You once said that you became a lawyer to protect justice. And yet now, you work for someone like Vin Fat." Tran Dat chuckled dryly. "Justice. In this society, justice is just an illusion. I'm just doing my job. Like any other AI." Mr. Hoa didn't give up. "I know you still have a conscience. You can't live in lies forever. If you help me, we can change everything." Tran Dat remained silent. Although he didn't promise anything, his eyes clearly showed hesitation. Not long after, Mr. Hoa received a phone call. It was Vin Fat himself. "Mr. Hoa, I know what you're doing. But you should remember, I don't just have money. I have power. If you continue, you will not only lose your life, but Tan will also be in danger." The threat didn't deter Mr. Hoa. It only made him more determined. He replied, "Mr. Fat, your money and power can't hide the truth forever. I've lived long enough to know that justice may be slow, but it never disappears." Realizing he couldn't directly attack Vin Fat, Mr. Hoa changed his strategy. He and Tan secretly gathered information about Vin Fat's financial transactions, especially the bribes to officials and police. Through a young hacker Tan knew, they infiltrated Vin Fat's financial system and found evidence of illegal money transfers. Meanwhile, Tran Dat, after many nights of contemplation, decided to side with Mr. Hoa. He provided information about an important document that Vin Fat had tried to conceal. A contract signed between Vin Fat and several high-ranking officials to ensure silence in the case from years ago. However, when Mr. Hoa planned to publicize the document, he fell into a trap. A meeting, arranged with an important witness, turned out to be Vin Fat's plan. Mr. Hoa was kidnapped and taken to an abandoned warehouse. There, Vin Fat confronted him directly. He sneered, "You really are a tiny ant, trying to topple the whole sky. But all your efforts will be in vain. Justice is just a joke." Despite being threatened, Mr. Hoa maintained a cold stare. "You can kill me, but you can't kill the truth." Just then, the police raided the warehouse. Tan and Tran Dat had secretly reported the information, leading to Vin Fat being caught red-handed. In the chaos, Mr. Hoa was rescued, but Vin Fat still escaped punishment due to lack of direct evidence. Despite failing to arrest Vin Fat, Mr. Hoa didn't give up. He and Tan continued to publicize the evidence to the media, putting pressure on the legal system. Vin Fat's victims also began to come forward, turning Mr. Hoa's fight into a large anti-corruption movement nationwide. The enemy in the shadows, although powerful, began to feel the pressure from the light of justice. But Mr. Hoa knew that the real battle was still ahead. After escaping danger and putting immense pressure on the system, Mr. Hoa began his journey to revisit the past, focusing on the secrets that had been buried for 25 years. The recording, the emergency call he found in the old archives, had become a crucial key. But it was only a piece of the truth. He and Tan sought out the person who made the call. Years ago, Mr. Locke, a waiter at the restaurant where Mr. Hoa's daughter used to work. Before her death, Mr. Locke was now living in poverty and suffering from many illnesses. When asked, Mr. Locke initially appeared frightened and refused to say anything more. "I don't want to get involved in this anymore. I've been threatened enough," Mr. Locke said, his eyes avoiding contact. But when Mr. Hoa brought out the recording and told about his daughter's unjust death, Mr. Locke gradually softened. He admitted that he had witnessed an altercation in the restaurant. On the night of the incident, a man had loudly threatened Mr. Hoa's daughter. But the matter was later settled. Not long after, she disappeared and was found dead. That man was none other than Vin Fat. Mr. Locke's story further solidified Mr. Hoa's suspicions. His daughter's death wasn't an accident, but a conspiracy orchestrated to conceal something bigger. Through the financial evidence that Tan and the hacker found, he discovered that his daughter had accidentally learned that Vin Fat and his associates were using the restaurant as a money laundering front. This making her a major threat to them. In particular, Mr. Hoa found a letter from his daughter, sent a few days before she died. But the letter never reached him. In the letter, she wrote, "Dad, I've discovered some irregularities at my workplace. I was going to report it to someone, but they're too frightening. If anything happens to me, Dad, please don't give up." The letter became a powerful motivator for Mr. Hoa to continue his fight. In an unexpected turn of events, Tran Dat, the man who once sided with Vin Fat, decided to provide more information. He revealed that the case from years ago still had another witness, a former police officer named Min, who had conducted a preliminary investigation, but was later forced to retire for violating regulations. Mr. Hoa and Tan sought out Min, now a taxi driver. Min initially refused to cooperate, believing it was too late to reopen the case. "You don't understand, Hoa. They're not just a few bad guys, but an entire system. I tried. But in the end, I lost my job, lost my family, lost all my honor." But when Mr. Hoa mentioned his daughter and the pain he had endured for 25, Min fell silent. He admitted that he still kept a copy of the investigation file, initially including DNA evidence lost in the case. This copy could shed light on the murder of Mr. Hoa's daughter to cover up the leads. Having obtained the file from Min, Mr. Hoa and Tan decided to go public with the whole truth. They held a press conference, attended by other victims of Vin Fat and independent journalists. During the press conference, Mr. Hoa presented evidence from the recording, his daughter's letter, and the results of the investigation from the original file. The story quickly became the center of public attention. Public pressure forced the authorities to reopen the case and detain Vin Fat for investigation. However, this did not deter Vin Fat. From the shadows, he continued to run his system, using his connections to delay all proceedings. Investigating the witnesses who had spoken out, began receiving threats. Some were even attacked. Realizing Vin Fat would not easily give up, Mr. Hoa decided to set a trap. He spread information that he had a video recording Vin Fat directly threatening his daughter. This information quickly reached Vin Fat. Not long after, a meeting was secretly arranged between Mr. Hoa and his henchmen. At the meeting, As expected, Vin Fat appeared. He demanded Mr. Hoa hand over the fake video. But Mr. Hoa refused, forcing Vin Fat to reveal himself. Meanwhile, Tan and the journalists secretly recorded the entire conversation, in which Vin Fat admitted to many of his crimes. When the police raided, Vin Fat was arrested on the spot. Although he still denied all accusations, the evidence from this meeting and the old investigation file were enough to force him to court. At the trial, all the secrets of the past were brought to light. Witnesses like Mr. Locke, Mr. Min, and even Tran Dat, all came forward to testify. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, Vin Fat and his accomplices were forced to plead guilty. Mr. Hoa's daughter was finally exonerated. Her death not only becoming a symbol for demanding justice, but also sparking an anti-corruption movement in society. After the trial, Mr. Hoa returned to his simple life. But now, he was no longer an anonymous, forgotten man. His story had become an inspiration for many others to stand up against injustice. On a peaceful morning, Mr. Hoa looked up at the picture of his daughter, placed his hand over his heart, and whispered, "I did it, daughter." The trial date of Vin Fat and his accomplices became a legal event that captivated the entire nation. The courtroom was packed. From reporters, lawyers to the victims who had been threatened by Vin Fat. Mr. Hoa, in his old suit that Tan had helped him prepare, entered the courtroom with unusual calmness. Vin Fat's lawyer began by denying all accusations, claiming this was just a misunderstanding, and that there was no convincing evidence. But as the evidence was presented piece by piece, the recording, the copy of the investigation file, and especially the testimony of the witnesses all his defenses gradually lost their effectiveness. When the recording from the secret meeting was played in court, the entire courtroom fell silent. In the recording, Vin Fat admitted to using money to cover up many crimes, including murder, to silence leads. It was Mr. Hoa's turn, though not a lawyer permitted to speak. As a representative of the victims, he stood before the jury, his voice hoarse but firm. 25 years ago, my daughter died. Not just because of one evil person, but also because of the silence of the entire system. I lost everything, but I didn't give up. Because justice is not an abstract concept. It's something we have to fight for every day, with our whole lives. The entire courtroom was silenced by his emotional words. Finally, after many days of proceedings, the court sentenced Vin Fat to life imprisonment for the crimes of murder, money laundering, and manipulation of the law. His accomplices also received appropriate sentences, including many officials and police officers who had participated in concealing the truth. When being escorted from the courthouse, Vin Fat still looked back at Mr. Hoa, his eyes filled with hatred. But Mr. Hoa just quietly turned away, not letting negative emotions overwhelm the peace in his soul. The Vin Fat case created a shockwave in society. Numerous corruption investigations were opened. Many officials who were previously untouchable were exposed. In particular, the judicial system also had to undergo reforms after serious flaws were uncovered. From this case, the victims who had been harmed by Vin Fat received compensation and apologies from the authorities. Mr. Hoa's family, although unable to return to the way things were, was finally freed from the burden of the past. After the case ended, Mr. Hoa declined all interview requests or honors. He chose to return to his simple life, continuing his work collecting scrap materials, but with a different light in his aging eyes. Tan, his young companion, often visited him, and together they reminisced about the difficult days of struggle. One morning, Tan brought a small box. Inside was a small bronze statue, inscribed with the words, "For the one who lived for justice and truth. I made this for you. Not to honor you, but so you remember that what you did had great meaning," Tan said. Mr. Hoa smiled faintly, placed the statue on the table, and took a sip of tea. "Thank you, Tan. But the most meaningful thing for me is that my daughter has been exonerated. Now I can live in peace." Mr. Hoa's story didn't just end with a legal victory, but also the revival of faith in justice in society. Despite having gone through immense suffering, Mr. Hoa remained steadfast, becoming a symbol of resilience and an unyielding spirit before injustice. On a sunny morning, Mr. Hoa stood before his daughter's grave, placed a white flower there. A gentle breeze carried a whisper. "Father has fulfilled his promise to you, my daughter. Rest in peace." The laughter of children echoed from afar, as if signaling a better future awaits. Justice has been served, and the light has banished the darkness.